More than 2,500 years ago, in the heart of ancient India, where Nepal stands today, a land filled with kings, warriors, and scholars, a question lingered in the minds of many. Why do we suffer? And is there a way to break free? Life in that era was a paradox. The wealthy lived in palaces, indulging in luxury, while the poor struggled to survive. The Brahmins, the highest class, claimed that destiny was set at birth. Your suffering, your joy, all predetermined by past karma. There was no escape, no second chance, only endless cycles of life and death. But then, something extraordinary happened. A child was born. Not just any child, but one whose destiny would shake the very foundations of tradition. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, a prince raised in unimaginable wealth, shielded from all pain and suffering. Yet, despite having everything, he would walk away from it all in search of something greater. His journey was unlike any other. He was not a god nor a prophet, but his teachings would shape civilizations. He would abandon the life of a prince to seek the truth of existence. He would challenge the beliefs of his time and discover a path that would change the course of history. This is the story of a seeker, a man who refused to accept the world as it was, a man who would become Buddha, the enlightened one, and it all began with a dream. In the grand palace of Kapilavastu, ruled by King Suddhodana of the Shakya clan, a deep longing filled the air. The king and his queen, Maya, yearned for an heir, a son who would inherit the throne and bring glory to their lineage. One night, as the queen lay in her chamber, she had a dream unlike any other. A magnificent white elephant, pure as the moon, descended from the heavens, holding a lotus flower in its trunk. It gently touched her side and entered her womb. The dream felt so vivid, so real, as if the universe itself had spoken to her. The next morning, the palace priests and sages gathered, studying the signs and reading the ancient texts. Their eyes widened with awe. "This child will be no ordinary prince," they declared. "He will either become a great king, ruling over vast lands, or he will renounce the world and lead humanity to enlightenment." Days turned into months, and as the time of birth drew near, Queen Maya followed the custom of returning to her family home. On her journey, she stopped at the beautiful Lumbini garden, a place where trees blossomed with fragrant flowers and birds sang in harmony with the wind. As she walked beneath the sacred sal tree, she suddenly felt the stirrings of labor. Holding onto a sturdy branch, she gave birth standing in perfect grace. The newborn prince took his first breath, his skin glowing with an unearthly radiance. Legends say that as soon as he was born, he took 7 steps forward, lotuses blooming beneath his feet with each step. He then raised his tiny hand toward the sky and proclaimed, "I am the awakened one. This is my last birth." The world stood still. The heavens rejoiced. But for his father, King Suddhodana, this prophecy was troubling. His son was meant to be a ruler, a warrior, a king. The thought of him choosing a spiritual path was unthinkable. And so from that day forward, the king made a decision. He would shield his son from anything that might awaken the desire to leave the palace. Thus began the life of Prince Siddhartha, a life of luxury, comfort, and absolute control. A life where suffering did not exist. At least, that's what the king wanted to believe. But destiny had its own plans. Inside the golden walls of Kapilavastu, Prince Siddhartha lived a life most could only dream of. His father, King Suddhodana, made sure that every moment of his son's existence was filled with comfort, beauty, and joy. 3 magnificent palaces were built, one for summer, one for the monsoon season, and one for winter. Each was adorned with the finest silk, jeweled fountains, and gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. Musicians played sweet melodies, servants catered to his every need, and no shadow of suffering was ever allowed to reach him. The king had only one goal: to make sure his son never longed for anything beyond the pleasures of the palace. The prince was given the best education, trained in the arts of war, philosophy, and governance. His strength was unmatched, his mind sharp, his presence admired by all. As he came of age, he was given a wife, Princess Yasodhara, a woman of great beauty and virtue. Their union was celebrated with grand feasts, and soon they welcomed a son, Rahula. The kingdom rejoiced, believing that the future of the Shakya dynasty was secure. But something stirred within Siddhartha. Despite the wealth, the power, and the adoration that surrounded him, there was an emptiness he couldn't ignore. Late at night, when the music had faded and the laughter had died down, he would find himself staring at the moonlit sky, a quiet voice whispering in his heart, "Is this all there is? A perfect life, a loving family, a kingdom at his feet." Yet, a question burned within him, one that no teacher, no pleasure, no distraction could silence. What was he searching for? He did not know, but soon he would find out. For years, Prince Siddhartha lived in a world crafted to be perfect, a world without sorrow, without suffering, just as his father intended. But fate had other plans. One day, as he walked through the royal gardens, he overheard a conversation between two servants. They spoke of the kingdom beyond the palace walls, of people who struggled to survive, of a world far different from the one he knew. Curiosity stirred within him. He had seen the grand halls of his palace, the beauty of the courtyards, the elegance of the feasts, but what lay beyond? Sensing his son's growing restlessness, King Suddhodana reluctantly allowed him to leave the palace. But he made sure the journey was carefully planned, ensuring that the prince would only witness the best parts of the city, the wealth, the prosperity, the joy. Yet destiny had other plans. As Siddhartha rode through the streets, he saw something he had never seen before. A frail old man, bent with age, struggling to walk. "Who is he?" Siddhartha asked his charioteer, Channa. "He is an old man, my prince. All who live long enough will one day grow weak and frail." Siddhartha felt a strange discomfort settle within him. He had never thought about aging before. Would he too become like that one day? The next day, he ventured out again. This time, he saw a man writhing in pain, his body weak and sick. "What is wrong with him?" "He is ill, my prince. Disease can strike anyone, at any time." Another truth he had never considered. The body, so strong, so full of life, could be broken by illness in an instant. A few days later, on his third journey, he saw something that shook him to his core. A lifeless body being carried through the streets, surrounded by grieving family members. "What is happening?" "This is death, my prince. One day, we must all face it." A shiver ran down his spine. Siddhartha had never been told about death. He had never even thought of an ending. But now, the truth was undeniable. No matter how much wealth one possessed, no matter how much joy one found, aging, sickness, and death were inescapable. That night, sleep did not come. His world no longer felt whole. It no longer made sense. Yet, it was on his fourth journey that something changed. Among the suffering, he saw a man dressed in simple robes, walking with a serene, peaceful presence. "Who is he?" "A monk, my prince. He has renounced the world in search of truth." For the first time, amidst all the sorrow he had witnessed, Siddhartha saw something else. Hope. Perhaps beyond suffering there was an answer. Perhaps beyond pain there was a way to peace. And in that moment a seed was planted. A realization took root. The life he had known, the palaces, the wealth, the pleasures, was not the answer he was seeking. His true journey was about to begin. Siddhartha Gautama had everything: a kingdom to inherit, a beautiful wife, a newborn son, and a life of unimaginable comfort. But none of it could silence the storm within him. The images of suffering haunted his mind. The old man, the sick man, the lifeless body, and the monk. Each had shown him a truth that no palace walls could hide. Is this my fate as well? He wondered. Will I too grow old, fall sick, and die? And if so, what is the purpose of all this? Night after night, he lay awake, tormented by questions no one could answer. Then one evening, as he stood on the balcony of his palace, gazing at the city bathed in moonlight, he heard the distant sounds of music and laughter from the royal halls. Dancers twirled, servants poured wine, and the air was filled with celebration. But to him, it felt hollow. He turned to look at his wife, Yasodhara, sleeping peacefully beside their infant son, Rahula. He loved them dearly. He loved his father. He loved his people. But the love he felt could not erase the truth he had seen. If he stayed, he would live as a king, rule his people, and one day die just like everyone else. But if he left, if he abandoned everything, maybe, just maybe, he could find something greater, a path beyond suffering, a truth beyond this endless cycle. That night, the decision was made. Siddhartha walked quietly through the palace halls, passing the guards who had protected him his entire life. He reached the royal stables, where his trusted charioteer Channa waited with his white horse Kantaka. "Take me beyond the city walls," he whispered. Channa hesitated. He saw the fire in the prince's eyes, a resolve he had never seen before. Without another word, Siddhartha mounted his horse, and together they rode into the night. Through the sleeping city, through the dense forests, through the gates of a life he would never return to. At the edge of a great river, far from the reach of the palace, Siddhartha dismounted. He removed his royal jewels, his silk robes, and his golden ornaments, every symbol of his past life. Taking his sword, he cut off his long, flowing hair, letting the strands fall into the wind. "I am no longer a prince," he declared. "I renounce this life in search of the truth." Handing his belongings to Channa, he sent him and Kantaka back to the palace. The loyal horse neighed, reluctant to leave his master, but Siddhartha did not turn back. Barefoot and dressed in the simple robes of a wandering monk, he took his first steps into the unknown. The prince was gone. A seeker had been born. Alone for the first time in his life, Siddhartha Gautama walked into the wilderness, leaving behind the only world he had ever known. The palace was now a distant memory. The silk robes and golden crowns had been replaced by a simple cloth draped over his body. The path ahead was uncertain, but his purpose was clear. He would find the truth, no matter what it took. He sought out the wisest teachers of his time, masters of meditation and philosophy. First, he studied under Alara Kalama, a renowned sage who taught deep states of meditation, where the mind detached from the body and entered vast, boundless awareness. Siddhartha quickly mastered this technique, reaching the highest levels his teacher could offer. But it wasn't enough. "This is not liberation," he realized. "I can escape the world through meditation, but when I return, suffering is still there." Unsatisfied, he continued his search. He found Uddaka Ramaputta, another great master who taught him even more refined techniques, reaching states beyond perception, beyond thought itself. Again, Siddhartha excelled. Again, he was offered leadership among the disciples, and again, he walked away. Even in the deepest meditation, the body still grows old, still falls sick, still dies. This is not the answer. If knowledge and meditation alone could not free him, then perhaps discipline, extreme self-denial, was the key. He journeyed to the kingdom of Magadha, where a group of ascetics had renounced all comforts of life, believing that by starving the body, enduring pain, and rejecting pleasure, one could purify the soul and break free from suffering. For the next 6 years, Siddhartha pushed his body beyond its limits. He ate so little that his ribs pressed against his skin. He held his breath for long periods, nearly to the point of death. He stood motionless under the blazing sun for hours, refusing to seek shade. He became so thin, so weak, that he could barely stand. His once strong body was reduced to mere bones, his skin dry and cracked. And yet, even in this suffering, he found no enlightenment. This path is not freedom, he thought. Neither indulgence nor self-torture leads to the truth. One morning, as he sat in meditation, his vision blurred, his mind foggy with hunger. Then, through the haze, he saw something, a memory, a moment from his childhood. He was a young boy, sitting under the shade of a rose apple tree, watching the world in stillness. The sun was warm, the air gentle. In that moment, without effort, without struggle, he had entered a state of deep, peaceful awareness, and suddenly he understood. True wisdom does not come from extremes, it comes from balance, from the middle way. At that moment, a village girl named Sujata approached. Seeing his frail body, she offered him a bowl of rice and milk. For the first time in years, Siddhartha accepted food. As he took the first bite, strength returned to his body. His mind became clear. The other ascetics, seeing this, were outraged. "He has given up," they whispered. "He has abandoned the path." But Siddhartha knew better. He had not abandoned the path. He had found it. With renewed strength, he stood up and walked away. He did not know it yet, but in just a few days he would sit beneath a tree, and he would never be the same again. The night was silent. The river murmured softly in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of earth and leaves. Beneath the towering Bodhi tree, Siddhartha Gautama sat with his legs crossed, his hands resting gently in his lap. His mind was clear, his purpose unwavering. "I will not rise until I find the truth." Darkness deepened, wrapping the world in silence. But inside Siddhartha's mind, a storm was brewing. From the unseen realms, a presence stirred. Mara, the lord of illusion and desire. He had ruled over human minds for eons, whispering doubts, feeding greed, trapping souls in endless suffering. Now he watched Siddhartha, a man on the edge of something extraordinary. If he succeeded, if he saw through the veil of ignorance, Mara's grip on the world would weaken. "No," the demon hissed. "This one must not awaken." And so, he sent his first weapon, desire. From the shadows, beautiful celestial maidens appeared. Their movements flowed like water, their eyes deep as the night sky. They danced before Siddhartha, their voices like the sweetest melodies. But Siddhartha did not move. He saw them for what they were, illusions, fleeting and empty. Mara clenched his fists. If temptation could not break him, then perhaps fear would. The air thickened, the earth shook. Storm clouds gathered, and monstrous figures emerged from the darkness. Beasts with fiery eyes, warriors wielding swords of flame. They roared, they charged, their shadows stretching across the land. But Siddhartha did not flinch. His breath remained steady. "Fear is an illusion," he thought. "Like the storm, it comes and goes. It holds no power over me." Mara growled in frustration. He had one last weapon left, doubt. He stepped forward himself, whispering into Siddhartha's mind. "Who are you to claim enlightenment? What proof do you have that you are worthy? What makes you think you can break free from the cycle of life and death?" For the first time that night, Siddhartha opened his eyes, but he did not look at Mara. Instead, he reached down and touched the earth. "The earth is my witness," he said. "It has seen my journey, my struggles, my search for truth, and now it will bear witness to my awakening." The ground trembled beneath him. Mara's illusions cracked and faded, His warriors turned to dust. The celestial maidens vanished like smoke. Mara had lost. Defeated, the demon let out a final angry cry before disappearing into the void. And then, silence. The night stretched on, deep and endless. But Siddhartha's mind was no longer trapped within it. He saw the universe as it truly was, not bound by time, not bound by self. He saw the endless cycle of birth, suffering, and death. The way people clung to things that would never last. The way pain arose from desire, from attachment, from the illusion of I and mine. And then, he saw the way out. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Middle Way. A path beyond suffering, a path beyond illusion. As dawn broke, the first golden rays of sunlight touched his face. Siddhartha Gautama was no longer just a man. He was Buddha, the Enlightened One. For 7 weeks, he remained beneath the Bodhi tree, absorbing the depths of his realization. The truth was clear, undeniable. But now, a new question arose. Should I keep this wisdom to myself? Or should I share it with the world? The answer would define the rest of his life and change the fate of humanity forever. 7 weeks had passed since the night of enlightenment. The Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, watching the world move around him. He had discovered the path to liberation, the way out of suffering. But as he gazed into the vastness of existence, a question lingered in his mind. Will they understand? The truth he had realized was profound, beyond words, beyond logic, beyond anything people had ever been taught. The world was trapped in desire, lost in illusion. Could they truly grasp what he had seen? Then, an image arose in his mind. A lotus pond. Some flowers had already risen above the water, blooming in the sunlight. Others were just beginning to emerge, while many still lay hidden beneath the mud. And in that moment, he understood. Not everyone would be ready. Not everyone would listen. But some would, and for them, he would teach. The Buddha remembered 5 men, his former companions, the ones who had once practiced severe asceticism with him. Kondana, Bhadya, Vapa, Mahanama, and Asaji. They had believed in self-denial, in starving the body to purify the soul. But the Buddha now knew that was not the way. They were staying in a forest near Varanasi, in a place called the Deer Park. And so, he set out on foot. When they saw him approaching from a distance, they whispered among themselves, "Here he comes, the one who abandoned the path. He gave up. He returned to a life of comfort. We will not welcome him." But as he came closer, something changed. There was something in his presence, something calm, something radiant. Without realizing it, they stood up. Without thinking, they cleared a place for him to sit. And then, the Buddha spoke. "I have found the way. I have seen the truth. If you listen, I will show you." They fell silent. And so, the wheel of Dharma began to turn. Sitting beneath the shade of a tree, the Buddha began his first teaching. There are 4 truths that everyone must understand if they wish to be free. The 5 men leaned in, listening. The first truth: dukkha. Life is suffering, not because life is always pain, but because nothing lasts. Youth fades, loved ones pass away. Even the greatest joys are temporary. Everything we cling to will eventually slip through our fingers. The second truth: samudaya. The cause of suffering is desire. We chase pleasure, we crave control, we fear loss, and in that endless wanting, we create our own suffering. The third truth: nirodha. There is an end to suffering. If we let go of attachment, if we free ourselves from craving, we will no longer be trapped in pain. This is nirvana, liberation from suffering, the highest peace. The fourth truth: magga. There is a path that leads to this freedom. It is not found in indulgence, nor in extreme self-denial. It is the middle way, the Noble Eightfold Path, a way of wisdom, of ethical living, of deep meditation. The way to awakening. When the Buddha finished speaking, the forest was silent. The 5 men sat still, their minds turning, their hearts shifting. Then Kandana, the eldest, looked up. His eyes shone with realization. "I understand now," he whispered. "I see the path." And in that moment he became the first disciple, the first to awaken through the Buddha's teachings. One flame had been lit, and from that flame, many more would follow. The Sangha, the community of monks, had begun. The teachings would spread. The Dharma would move forward. The wheel of Dharma had turned for the first time, and it would never stop. Word of the Buddha's teachings spread like ripples in a pond. The 5 disciples at the deer park were just the beginning. More and more people came to listen, drawn by something they couldn't quite explain. His words weren't just philosophy. They were a reflection of life itself. Rich or poor, young or old, warrior or merchant, anyone who truly listened felt something shift inside them. One by one, they abandoned their old ways. Some left behind wealth, some left behind power, some left behind the burdens of their past. They joined the Buddha, walking the path of the Dharma, and so the Sangha was born. A wandering community, moving from town to town, from village to village. They owned nothing but their robes and a simple bowl for food. They slept under trees, meditated in silence, and lived only on what was freely given. But they carried something far greater than possessions. They carried wisdom. As the Buddha and his disciples traveled, people from all walks of life came seeking guidance. Some came out of curiosity, some came with skepticism, and some came looking for something they had lost. Among them was a powerful king, King Bimbisara of Magadha. He had heard of the Buddha's wisdom and wished to meet him. When they finally stood face to face, the king asked, "What is the greatest power a man can have?" The Buddha smiled gently. "A king may rule over a great land, but the one who conquers his own mind is greater still. The true king is not the one who commands armies, but the one who has no fear, no anger, no greed, the one who rules himself." Bimbisara was deeply moved. He bowed before the Buddha and offered him a gift. Not gold, not jewels, but a monastery, a place where the Sangha could rest and teach. And so, Venuvana Monastery became the first refuge of the Buddha's followers. A place where monks could meditate, where seekers could learn, where wisdom could take root and grow. The Sangha grew, and with it, so did the Buddha's impact. His teachings reached the ears of the most unlikely followers, those who had once dismissed him, those who had once opposed him. Among them was Sariputta, a brilliant scholar who had spent his life searching for truth. When he heard a single verse from one of the Buddha's disciples, he felt as if he had woken from a dream. "What you have just said contains more wisdom than all the scriptures I have ever read," he admitted. He sought out the Buddha and became one of his closest disciples. Then came Moggallana, a man of fierce determination, and Ananda, the Buddha's loyal attendant, who would later become the guardian of his words. Men and women, rulers and beggars, scholars and laborers, they all walked the same path. They shaved their heads, donned the simple robe, and dedicated themselves to a life of mindfulness and compassion. No barriers of caste, no boundaries of wealth, only the Dharma. But not everyone welcomed the Buddha's teachings. Many Brahmins and ascetics saw him as a threat. He was challenging centuries of tradition, questioning the authority of the scriptures, breaking the walls of caste and privilege. "How can a mere man claim to have found the truth?" they demanded. "What proof do you have that your path is the right one?" The Buddha never argued. He never sought to defeat anyone in debate. Instead, he simply answered, "Come and see for yourself." Those who listened with an open heart often found their doubts fading. Those who clung to their pride, well, the Buddha had no quarrel with them. He only smiled and continued walking. He was not here to win. He was here to teach. And so the Dharma continued to spread, not by force, not by conquest, but by truth. One mind at a time, one heart at a time. Years passed, and the Buddha's teachings had spread far and wide. Kings, merchants, farmers, and monks, thousands had embraced the path of wisdom and compassion. But even the greatest of teachers is bound by the same truth he preached. All things are impermanent. Even the body of the enlightened one must one day fade. The Buddha, now 80 years old, walked slowly but steadily, his presence still radiating peace. His disciples followed him on his final journey, moving from village to village. He spoke not of death, not of endings, but of the Dharma, of how it must live on, beyond him, beyond his body. One evening, he and his followers reached Kushinagar, a quiet town surrounded by lush forests. There, he sensed that his time had come. He lay down between two sal trees, their white blossoms drifting gently in the evening breeze. His disciples gathered around, sorrow in their eyes. Ananda, his devoted attendant, knelt beside him, struggling to hold back tears. "Lord, what will we do when you are gone?" he whispered. The Buddha looked at him with kindness. "Ananda, do not weep for me. The Dharma is your guide now. Everything that is born must pass. This body is not who I am. The truth I have shown you, let that be your refuge." His voice was calm, his words steady. "Work diligently for your own liberation. Do not seek refuge in anyone, not even in me. Be a light unto yourselves." The disciples listened in silence, committing his final words to heart. Then, as the moon rose in the night sky, the Buddha entered deep meditation, moving beyond the realm of thoughts, beyond suffering, beyond self. With one last breath, he entered nirvana. No more birth, no more death, only perfect peace. His disciples mourned, but they also knew this was not an end. His body was cremated, and his ashes were divided among the kings and rulers who had followed his teachings. They built stupas, sacred monuments, to house the relics, places where future generations could come and remember. But the real legacy of the Buddha was not in ashes, not in stone. It was in the hearts of those who carried his wisdom forward. The Dharma spread, from India to Sri Lanka, from China to Japan, from Tibet to the West. Over centuries, it grew, transformed, adapted, but always remained rooted in the same truth. The same truth that started beneath a tree in Bodh Gaya. The same truth that turned the wheel of Dharma for the first time. And even now, more than 2,500 years later, that wheel is still turning. Because suffering still exists. Because people still seek peace. Because the path is still open to those who wish to walk it. The Buddha was never meant to be worshipped. He was never meant to be a god. He was a teacher, and his lesson still lives on.